Hello, my name is Gray Armstrong. I uh, use he, him pronouns, and I self identify as a minority lottery winner. Um, if if it is a minority status, I probably am that. The most applicable ones, I think, to this discussion will probably be that I'm an African American, that I am queer, and that I am transgender. Um, you can get into the other varieties, but they may or may not come up in this conversation in particular.
Thank you. Yeah. So the main theme overall is looking at appreciation versus appropriation.
Right.
And like Black creativity constantly co-opted, and that causes innovation. So out of curiosity, I was wondering if you've experienced like athleticism emphasized as a practice or a value, growing up or in as an adult.
As I, it's funny because I assumed this was mostly going to be about like the dance community itself, uh,
Oh, no, it's
which
your
I feel
personal
like
experience.
which I feel like I have a different answer for. But personally, yes, being athletic is, I would say, considered pretty neutral, like being an artist. It's one of the things that, for me, distinguishes some bits about like white gender versus black gender norms. Is there certain qualities that we don't attribute the same way? So, like being athletic, being powerful in some way is considered amazing. It's great. So most black kids that I knew growing up had, if not some like thing that their parents were making them get into, they usually had a lot of their play centered around being athletic, looking up to athletes, looking up to people that work with their body, people that do these things. And the genderedness comes in there specifically of who is interested in what. Uh, Basketball is pretty universal for a lot of people. Um, Football tends to be more of a boy thing, softball a girl thing. Um, Baseball is more boys. Uh, you can start getting weird into like track is pretty universal. Swimming is fair and even. Um, for me personally, it was distinct when I got into middle school. My mom was came to me and said, "You need to pick a sport." She's like, you got to pick a sport. You got to pick an after school activity." And she didn't consider like the non-sports really to be an option from what I remember. My brother was into sports. He ran cross country, which a lot of people apparently don't know what that is, which is just running through the woods for long periods of time, basically, over rivers and stuff, um, which I had zero interest in. It seemed really long, and I didn't get it. But I cheered him on, and then he also ran track and did wrestling as well. And then in high school went into tennis. And he's not particularly gifted physically, like that was never his strong suit. So when it was my turn, I my mom and I fought a lot because, as I said, some of them are gendered, and I was always choosing the ones that she wanted me to not do, or I was choosing the ones that she like we couldn't afford. I wanted to do boys gymnastics, but I would do gymnastics if I had access to that. But that was really expensive. Or I wanted to do ice skating, and it was kind of the same. Uh, and so then, she was like, "Well, why don't you do a more standard hobby?" And went towards. I was like, "Well, what about football?" And she said, "No." I was just like, "I want to hit on my friends. What do you mean?" Um, and then, my brother did wrestling, uh, and my mom again was like, "No, you can't do wrestling. Girls don't do that." and there was a girl named Jasmine who, in fact, did both. And I was like, Mom, look, look, you can't tell me this doesn't exist. And she's like, oh, there's gonna be like weird gender norms. This is my favorite. She's like, the boys are gonna try to feel you up. Do you know what that means? And I was like, they're not gonna have time because I'm gonna be pressing their face into the mat. They're gonna be distracted, and I'm gonna be whooshing them into the. And so she said no. So I briefly ran track, but I had some health stuff come up. So that was really the last time she pushed me into sports. Um, I did a little bit of tennis in high school as like a summer program thing, uh, but that was about it. It's more of an arts kid.
Did you personally like how would you equate dance to sports or athleticism? And or was there anything like from your elders that was there any connection that dance was athletic or no?
Uh, yes and no. Dance is, this is so strange to try to explain. Dance is music. So, and dance is natural. So the expectation was that everybody can dance and everybody dances at like the obvious times. Um, Now the athleticism came into be with what you did as a dancer. So things like if you're gonna b-boy, like that's athletic, that's powerful, that's got these qualities to it. Even like ballet was considered in its own way to be athletic because it required such control and stamina. Stamina. Um, like crumping was getting popular around the time that I was growing up. Um, and the thing that everybody really liked about it was that it was so powerful and big and athletic and strong. Um, which reminds me of like praise dancing, which kind of has the same qualities to it. So although nobody named it like it, it's not athletic in the same category as sport is, but it is athletic, and there's a huge value for it to be athletic. In this, like looking up to dancers, we're looked up to the same as sports players.
Yeah.
You could be a ball player or you could be a dancer, and if you were good, they're like yes. So if you were growing up, say, uh, and you were a boy and you wanted to be a dancer, it would be fine, particularly if you picked one that had themes of athleticism in it. So, like modern or contemporary would be a little bit harder for some people, but ballet and the strictness and the rigidity of it, for some people, would still be okay, or like street dances would be okay. So, in some ways, it depended more so on gender, but it was kind of more equally accessible. Like all art forms are a human expression, is almost the way that I would consider it to be.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go into now talking specifically about blues. Do you remember when you first heard blues music or the equivalent? And as you said, dance is music. So would it be correct that when you heard music, you were also moving to it?
When I mean, I feel like I tell the story all the time. When I was very young, my early memories of music and dance um, really starts with being in peer groups um, and jam circles, what we call jam circles and swing and blues dancing. There was no name for it. It was just dancing. Uh, and it's that same structure of a bunch of people in a circle. There's a lot of clapping, yelling on the outside. There's somebody in the middle. That person can be an individual. There can be two people. Variations. It can be competitive. It can be um, supportive. It can be whatever you want it to be. Um, and so when music was on, that was kind of a thing that often happened. Um, People moving and dancing about the house was normal. I often was with various black families during that time period. Um, So it was really common to see like Sunday mornings music playing in the house and people are dancing and cleaning and working and like having this back and forth, going to church and learning both the movements and the associated like how to clap, how to move, how to like keep time with the community, and how to sing. So there wasn't really as much distinction. And then you kind of were, for a lot of youth programs, you were sent kind of in two different directions based on what your interests were and where they thought you might be a better fit. So some people went a little bit more towards dance, and some people went a little bit more towards singing, but it wasn't uncommon to have the singing happen afterwards and people all do that and there's dancing, or to learn the routines that so and so was learning. Like it just is this ever revolving process. And so those are like some of my first memories. Like I don't really remember there being a distinction in my mind between secular and non-secular dancing and music, really. I just knew I wasn't very confident. Um, and so I really struggled with the dancing component of it. Well, I struggled with dancing and singing because really I was struggling with I had an unwillingness to show up, um, which is frowned upon. And so I got made fun of enough times that I was just like, all right, okay, I get it. I'm not going to dance. I'm just going to be a bad black person, and that'll be fine. Um, and so I was of that opinion for most of the time until university. Um, there is a brief stint in there. There's some brief moments. There's a couple years where uh, my adopted grandfather was alive, and we danced. Um, we danced to like R&B and blues, and I think jazz and like jump blues, like this era, 30s, 50s era of music, that um, like we did a little bit of partnered, but it was just the music that was about. And I like watched him and his wife dance since they were just like doing stuff, and it's all very sweet. Um, and then like you can tell the demographic because everybody has their associated music, and so then they have associated dances. So like if I'm spending time with him, I'm gonna get this type of music and this type of dancing. If I'm with his daughter, I'm gonna get this music and this type of dancing. Like my mother and the man she married were very close in age, but they were from different parts of black culture, and had different interests, and so they diverged really strongly in what they liked, um, and that also showed variance. So for me, I would say I started listening to blues music that I remember with him, and then um,
Sorry, him, is that
right,
your mother married?
my no, my adoptive grandfather. Sorry. Um, and when he died, I really struggled broadly, um, and because it was his music, and I wasn't seeing him anymore. Uh, Besides the jazz that the man my mother married listened to, I kind of lost those sounds for a really long time. And I'd repressed a lot of those memories. So it wasn't until university that I went to the local swing club and took this class, because somebody needed somebody to go with her. And I hated dancing, and I was going through a really rough breakup. And I thought, well, I'm miserable. Uh, I need to at least, maybe if I do something nice for somebody, I'll feel something. You know, if nothing else, I did something nice because she couldn't find anybody to go. Um, and I remember going and dancing, and there was something about it that over time started sticking with me, but I was having a hard time. So, despite my classmates asking questions like, "Do you know this song? You're singing it." And I'm like, "I don't know this. What are you talking about?" They're like, "Have you done this before?" "I don't think so." And I didn't know what was happening for a really long time until a bunch of circumstances kind of came together. The person that was teaching us Lindy Hop and swing, uh, we have our first dance. I immediately am hooked. Like up until this point, I was having panic attacks all the time. I was not dancing. Um, we had our first dance. I was like, "This is incredible." And then another song comes on, and I reflexively am like, would you want to dance another song?" Um, and he listens and he goes, "Well, this is a blues song. Do you know any blues?" And I said, "You haven't taught me any, so no." Like, and so he says, "Okay, hold on tight and don't rock step." And we get through this dance, and I am floored. Like, there's something about it that's really, really resonated. And so I spend the whole night at home looking on YouTube for swing dance, no rock step. Swing dance, but close. Lindy hop, but close. Like, what is this thing? I search his name. I search all kinds of. I search for the song that I didn't know the name of, and eventually I find a video of him dancing with one of his dear friends, and I saw that it was called blues dancing, and I go down this path. Uh, I end up watching a video of David Stone that I can't find anymore. I don't. I promise it exists. Of him in this armchair talking at Blue Shout, um, or for a Blue Shout, and he's describing that the dance is black. And that Lindy Hop was also black, which I had no idea. And it floored me. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. These are black dances. Is this why this feels kind of familiar? Is this? And then I started thinking about the songs, and I had this like flood of memories that came up. And I was like, oh, we sang these songs, just like we sang Motown together, and we duet, and we danced, and we did these things, and like this was the background of my life with my favorite person for a really long time. Uh, but when you're a kid, you don't think much of it. It's just like their music. I don't know. Um, and so I went back to Brian, my instructor, and I was like, "These dances are black." And he's like, "You didn't know?" And I said, "No, I didn't know." And he's like, "Okay, we're all going to sit down." And so he forces all of us to sit down and watch a bunch of clips and learn a bunch of stuff. And it was um, really impactful. So, in some ways, I usually say, well, I started blues dancing in 2012 um, because that is when a more official start happened. But I also feel like that doesn't feel true in some ways as well. But nobody called it anything. Like we were just dancing.
Yeah. I think I've heard Damon say that too. Like you go and you ask elders, they'll be like, "Oh, that's just dancing." Like, when if you show them a video, they're like, "Oh, we didn't call it blues dancing. We just called it dancing."
I mean, this is a whole other. That's an article I want to write
Mhm.
about just dancing because there's a myth that blues dancing doesn't exist because the elders will just call it just dancing. But if you look at videos of say Norma, and her talking about Lindy Hop as it emerged, she was like, "We were just dancing." If you look at, like, it's a generational thing, and people don't understand that language isn't meant to be literal. Like, what about the dances that are coming out now? In 100 years, are we going to look at them? We're going to name them something. But at the time, we're not thinking about it. Like, you ask the kids, they're like, "Well, we're just dancing." Sometimes they'll have a name of like, "Oh, we're doing the bank, the blank," but like, that's just how we talk about it. It's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It was just dancing. Like, I didn't know jam circles were a thing. It was just dancing. I didn't know that he was teaching me anything in particular. It was just dancing. It was like, hold on to me and step on my feet.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was shocked. I remember he was shocked that I didn't know how to dance. That nobody had danced with me yet at that point. I think I was like 7.
Hmm.
And he's like, "No, you don't know how to. Nobody's. What do you mean?"
So I'm gonna do a little tangent. You had
Mm-hmm.
mentioned praise dancing.
Yeah.
Um, so that's I would say that's something that could you expand a little bit on that? Like, is that what you're talking about with the like everyone's doing routines or a church or no or
Is that a question that you don't know, or is that a question that you're saying from?
I think I know what praise dancing is, but yeah,
Okay, okay,
like
okay. I
yeah.
was like, I
For
was
the
like, wait, I
context.
think you know. You should know.
Yes.
Like, where are we?
Yes.
Okay. Um, yeah. So I, I think about it like there are secular dances, and there are non-secular dances. Um, some of the non-secular dances, so religious dances, um, I haven't been religious in a very long time, so forgive me if anybody's in the comments and be like, you're right. Um, whatever you say is probably right. Uh, but there's different styles of dancing to gospel and spirituals, like through the lineage of, say, like the ring shout. So you get into like, again, words. There's like having the spirit. There's like there's mime. Mime was really popular for a while. People were mixing in crump with mime when like because crump was also religious at first. Uh, then there's sometimes routines that people will do. There's also just like I don't know how to explain it, but there's just all these usually solo styles of movement. Sometimes it's a group thing um, that move from like things that harken back to Africa more directly, and things that have kind of transformed over time. That are all about evoking emotion and the passion for religion, the Christianity, etc. Um, and I never like never thought that hard about it. It's just kind of it's that style that they do. It's cool. It's super cool. There's a lot of there's a lot of variations.
So off, and that kind of makes me think of at Mez Jelly 2017, New York City, you did a class. I can't remember what it was called, but I knew we talked about like church songs. Do you remember offhand? Um,
uh, Jeez, Mess Jelly. I forgot that event existed. Yeah, I it was a class that I was teaching regularly at the time, I think, or maybe it was the first iteration of the relationship between gospel and blues and spirituals and blues, because it's in many ways to me it's very much the same. Um, so it serves for a lot of people the same function, depending on if you are a believer or not. Um, and that was basically what the class was about, was giving people access to that. And so through introducing them to the themes and practices of gospel movements, gospel concepts, gospel sounds and call and response and all these things, tying that in, hearing that in blues, and then seeing how, okay, but this developed this way. But it is still from the same culture. Um, so that's where you get like this kind of thing. And so if you get into like more gospel music or music, there's a certain rhythm structure to it. Even with blues, with that rhythm structure, you will see there's a there's a call that all of us have been taught to respond to until you feel it, and then there's a whole thing. Yeah.
Thank you. So then the before we kind of move on, um, I had like a section like anything else you want to talk about with direct or indirect descendants from blues? Like, have you tried out hip hop or have you? I mean, you mentioned R&B, you mentioned jazz. I'm guessing rock and roll, maybe in that kind of mix of from depending on who you're with, a parent or an auntie or whatever. Um, but anything else you want to like speak to that?
I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways because I was so strongly not dancing, kind of an unusual person for that. Like I stuck with the more music side of things. My family on my mother's side is musicians, um, and so there's a deep love of musicians. I went into singing. My brother went into band. I went into band much later. I would say, in general, because of the lack of distinction, it was more distinguished by who you were with than like, this is rock and roll, and this is this, and this is this, and this is like nobody categorized it this way. It was just this is the black radio station, and we're listening to it. And roughly around this period is their music, and roughly around the period is their music. And there's two other stations. So are you looking for like the old people music, the like current young people music, or hip hop? And there was a lot of overlap. Don't get me wrong, but those were like those stations, and that's what everybody listened to. That was it. Um, like some people, I think had CDs at some point. You know, like that's about it. Like it wasn't that kind of thing. So we really got a lot of what the radio played. Uh, like my grandmother had a collection of CDs, like a huge collection of CDs. My mom did, um, her husband did, but they were all different, and you would just like dig through the stack and find whatever it was. But again, there was no, this is blues music and this is jazz and this is da 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 da. It was like, yeah, that's Mama's music. That's that's Al's music. I guess I don't know. I didn't
Yeah.
know that I was in love with Ray Charles's music until college because I didn't know I knew the song. I remembered the melody.
Mhm.
I didn't remember anything else about it, so I couldn't look up famous black R&B musicians from this time period and top favorite songs. Like Hit the Road Jack. How are you going to find that when you're a kid? I was obsessed with that song. But to me it was just music.
Yeah.
It was no different than anything else anybody played. The only difference was Sundays was gospel.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
it. I don't know.
Okay, and then I've been asking, have you seen Sinners, the
Yes.
movie? And what do you think of the scene where he is calling the ancestors, past and then the future? Motion light. Um, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that scene where he's playing and then people are manifesting both past and future.
I think like it's been interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people about that scene. I meant to write about it. I still haven't done it. I should probably do it. I just haven't watched it again because the themes of violence are a little hard for me. Um, but I thought that scene was really well done for evoking a feeling. I don't think it's necessarily the most accurate in a lot of different ways if we're looking for like the dancing that was done at the time or like there wasn't as much like partner stuff. Like it leaned heavily, if I remember correctly, into solo stuff, and it was very like the the dances that have made it to white consciousness. So there was a step it, you know, there wasn't any of that for just like a random black dance that a lot of white community doesn't know exists. Uh, like they picked hip hop, they picked African dance, they picked like a little bit of couple stuff. Like those are the ones. It's probably some jazz. Those are the ones that I remember off the top of mind. Maybe some like Alvin Ailey adjacent modern.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot more things they could have picked. Uh, but I think I appreciated the scene because what I felt like it demonstrated really well to people was one, the continuation. That the thing I often say is like, this isn't, it's all the same music. It's all the same music. Like when you try to separate it into genres and you try to put them in little boxes and define it, and you're like, why are there all these outliers? I'm like, because nobody's thinking about it that way. That's not a structure that we use. You don't go into a new art form thinking you're going to create anything. You go into it being like, I want some of this, I want some of this, I want some of this, and I'm going to make my own voice in this. I'm going to make my own style in this. And so that's an element of people understanding that, but there's this transformative power of music and dance in black spaces. Particularly, I will say, my experience of it is mostly in African American spaces, and I think that distinction is important for a bunch of different reasons. Um, but it evoked the same feeling as um, the heights of dancing to gospel music or dancing to spirituals as a collective, but demonstrating it in a secular space. For people to understand that like raw emotionality that comes up and out of the body and is shared in the collective, and the collective sharing of this moment of this uh, I often will remind people that this dance you're having is something that can never be replicated. It is a singular moment to a song with a singular person with all of this context, and wherever you're at, you can never get this back. So like reach for the heights of it, reach for the impassioned qualities of self, fully share. And I feel like that scene really, like what makes that scene so powerful is that. And to me, that's what all black art is typically about. It's how do I make that experience show up in blank. Um, and so to me, the best blues dances, the best Lindy Hop, the best hip hop, praise dancing, crumpin, whatever, it all has that feature and moves the people around them to also be moved. So I like
Yeah, I
this.
mean, so for only having seen it once, you pretty much, yeah, like it sounds like you.
I thought about
And
it a
actually,
lot. I thought about it a
I was
lot.
I actually, and I can send this to you if you like. I found just that scene. It's like 6 minutes. I found that scene on YouTube. If you want me to send that to you, if that's helpful.
It is helpful. Yeah, this
Okay,
is.
cool. I will.
I saw it. I saw this movie a couple weeks, I think, after it came out, and I haven't seen it since. Um, and there's a bunch of really interesting things in it that I'd like to talk about, and that scene is the one that most people are struck by. Um, and to me, that's what it's all about. That's what the black art
Yeah,
is all about.
I think it's a great like that you pointed out that it was the dances that were white or that are in the white consciousness. Because as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, like I would say that I think I recognize most of those dances. Um, but I could, yeah, like they weren't going necessarily to be spanning the, or what, yeah, that's a very interesting, um, like thing that you taught from the view that you had. Um, yeah. Okay. Then this last thing before we move on to a different
Mm.
topic, any thoughts at all about breaking at the 2024 Summer Olympics? Or you can pass.
This is the one that went viral. Yes, I just want
Yes,
to
it
make
was the
sure
first
that.
time that breaking was recognized as an Olympic sport, and then instead of being able to really, feature the true, you know, it went viral for, yeah,
less less desirable reasons. I mean,
yeah,
I occasionally try to read when moments like this happen. I'm always curious. Okay, how did this happen? That's as a research person. This is a thought that always comes to mind. This is what drives so much of my research. It's not why, it's how. And a friend and I have had conversations about this. They do research for profession. They're a professor, Christy J, and they've said like, they're always researching why. Why did this happen? And I'm always researching how. And so when this happened, on one hand, I valued the communal experience in private black spaces around, um, like Schadenfreude, I guess, of like this person doesn't get it and they think they get it. They think they get it enough to go to the Olympics about it. Um, and there being this like catharsis, I would say. Uh, but the more I read about the story and I read about how it happened and, um, you know, get weeding through some of the mythos that was there, I'm like, this is unfortunate, and I think it's unfortunate that this cultural outsider is the one who's getting highlighted, um, in a moment of celebration because of the ignorance of some of her choices. That being said, I think it is difficult to, when you have a global phenomenon, to expect people to have the context. I'm not saying they shouldn't have the context. I absolutely think they should, particularly if they're going to go on a global stage to represent this thing. Uh, I think they should have it. But part of what this conversation is about is the appropriation of black culture and black art forms and how people don't realize on the generous side they don't realize, on the less generous side they don't care, um, about the specific qualities that go into that. They don't understand where this is coming from. They see what they see and they assume that that's all there is. It's like the Just Dancing quote. This is, to be fair, this is a random one, but like Just Dancing through the lens of outsiders and people who don't research this even within the culture, you're like, oh, then it was meaningless. Because for us, Just Dancing is nothing. Just Dancing isn't nothing. Just Dancing is a way of saying this is not a thing that we labeled. It might be a thing that people did, but it was just a thing that people did because it's just a part of this long legacy. It only will be later for a lot of people that means something. Um, but you can still see its impacts. Like, there's a reason why you can look at these old Lindy Hop and blues videos, if you can find any, and see similar movements to the hip hop that's done today. Like, it's clearly related. It's clearly related. It's clearly important. It's clearly that those people taught their kids, that taught their kids, their kids took it, turned it into something else. So it's not unimportant, but at the time, it was just kid stuff. It was just dancing. And I think it's really easy to think you understand more than you do. And then go, oh, I'm an expert because I've like done a little bit on this, and I understand what I understand. But for example, I saw the Sinners bit, and I went, "Oh, they're highlighting dances that general audiences will understand." Like they're not getting into more interesting dances. They're not highlighting like there wasn't buck and wing dances. You didn't get into like these really. There wasn't flat footing. There was none of the blues dances. There was none of like some of the more rock and roll dances that people don't know as well. There wasn't bop. There wasn't partner dances. There's so many things that they could have highlighted, that they could have brought people in for, but that doesn't translate on camera, and it doesn't translate to all of these audiences. If they knew about them at all, which they might not have, because some of these dances are really locked regionally or in families. And so I was like, well, that makes sense. And I moved on. I thought this was a like very clear fact. And you're like, I guess it was. I did understand it all. I'm like, yeah, that was intentional, clearly. Like the outfits were also like all of it was intentionally coded to make, and that's what I think is brilliant about the film is like it makes a lot of things digestible, and yet there is a lot of details that I saw, and then I went with a white friend, and we were arguing. I was like, no, 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 you missed this context. How did you miss the context? How did you miss this? How did you miss this through line? How did you miss this through line? Oh, this detail, this detail, this detail. This is what they're trying to evoke. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, did we watch the same movie? And I had to explain, as like, these are references, these are themes. This is a black quality. This is a thing that everybody knows, but nobody names, nobody talks about. But if you don't know, you're just going to skip over it because you don't see it. And that's what I think happened at the 2024 Olympics, more so than anything else. Um, like having read some of the news articles that came out afterwards and some of the ones that continue to come out because people are still talking about this, I think it's unfortunate. I think like I think I think if you're gonna represent an art form on a global stage, no matter what art form it is, no matter where you're from, you should do the work to truly understand the thing you are representing. I think they should have came to the United States. I think they should have spent time with black people or elders in their scene. I think they should have done these things. I understand it's a small little organization, that kind of thing, but then you don't do it. If you're not sure, you don't do it. Like, and that is ultimately why I think the black community was so frustrated, but mostly just like embarrassed for her. Is they're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I think it's a shame because it means that like the upcoming Olympics isn't going to have breaking. Which, to be fair, you have to propose like it as an option. But
Yeah.
and there was debate for like in the culture of should it be considered a Olympic sport or not? Like it's just dancing, but it is also athletic, and what does that mean? And despite all of that, I think people were excited to have an element of our culture be on the global stage. And so that was a
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah. So one thing is the irony is that the woman is actually considers herself as a dance scholar who is an expert on this in Australia. And so that's even more just like like as you were saying, like, okay, you can study it, but did you study it? Like, and then and then Damon also had mentioned when I asked him that question, he said, "Oh, this was actually testing ground to see if they could eventually get ballroom into the Olympics." I was like, "That's fascinating." That so since it didn't go well, it kind of shut down the potential of like Arthur Murray ballroom dancing getting into the Olympics.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah, so
That's
even
not
the
entirely
motive
surprising.
wasn't. Sorry,
Yeah.
say it again.
I said that's not entirely surprising, but that is, I did not know that.
Yeah, Damon's connected to someone. I was like, oh, when you say it, now it makes sense. Like so cultural legacy. I have very specific questions, but more so what I'm trying to get at is like the difference in expectations of, I'm gonna put it as non-black dancers coming to a scene versus those who were raised in Black American culture, African American culture, such as like cultural standards, matriarchy. Um, and so I could read the question if you'd like, or you can just, if there's something that's popping to mind, you could go for it.
Mm. I think like okay, so there's so many routes to go here. Let me see. Is cultural legacy crucial for authentically engaging in the blues? I think I think eh, one of my favorite pieces that I've written is about being a guest versus being a tourist. Uh, is cultural legacy required to participate in the blues to authentically engage? I don't think it is required. I think, like I was saying, I think having a relationship to knowing if you are being a guest or a tourist in a culture is really important. So, for an example, the reason that this article that I wrote came about was I was in Boston and I was kind of watching how people interacted with the spaces that I was in. It's just people watching and thinking about things. And it really struck me the difference in people that entered a space and expected it to change to them and people that entered a space and changed to the space. Like, why did they make the choices that they made? How did we get to this point? And like, how is it that two very similar people in the same area can engage in a space so differently? Um, Also, going to uh, being slightly more removed, going to a step in class and then their step in set with a group of white blues dancers and seeing how people, again, interacted with the space, who at the end really struggled and said, oh, I wanted this, I needed this wasn't this way, this wasn't acceptable, this wasn't what I wanted and needed, blah, blah, blah. And the people that were like, yes, I was unfamiliar and uncomfortable in these ways, and I didn't know how to navigate that. But that makes sense. That's the point. I'm not used to being here. Of course, I'm not going to. I don't have expectations for it. I know that black culture doesn't tend to, and we are getting better about this, uh, cater to vegetarians for a bunch of historical reasons. We're pretty terrible about it. Although there is now starting to be vegetarian spots and vegan soul food, which is cool. Um, but some people got upset about that, or got upset that there wasn't gluten-free options, and some people went and said, "Oh, I know that this is a value, and so I'm going to bring my own food that I can eat with everybody." And if somebody asks, I will say, "This is why I didn't do that," or I'll just eat the sides, or I will what have you. But that difference of expecting the space to change to suit them and being open to finding other ways to be in the space or um, like in different ways allowing themselves to be changed by the space of if you're not used to speaking up, what does that mean? Do you expect people to um, like change their style of communicating or not? So, an example of this uh, that I like to reflect on is we were at Blue Shout, and there was a soul food dinner um, that was made by a non-African American. Um, so I would classify it more as a Southern dinner. I think it's important. It's an important distinction. People can fight me on it. It matters. Um, but we had some people, some African Americans, we had some white Americans, we had some people that were black from not the US, all at the same table. And I was explaining to the visitor what soul food was and what was soul food on this plate and what wasn't soul food on this plate and why it was different, but also what this experience could be like. Um, and there was a large group of us. And so, because most of the table was filled with African Americans or Black diaspora, we fell into communication patterns. And at the time, I was presenting as a woman, and therefore I was in charge of this conversation because I was the eldest of that group, and I was also a woman. And so my job, one of my jobs, was to make sure that everybody at the table was taken care of. And so we ended up gaining a crowd of white blues dancers. And I was like, we're not centering you. You're allowed to be here, but they would ask sometimes, and I'd be like, yeah, sure, you can sit in, but we're not changing how we're doing this. So if you want to participate, you need to participate. And a friend, a white American friend, at some point, it's been a long time, and she leans in with this hand signal, leans in, and I let the conversation keep going, and she's starting to vibrate. She wants to talk. She's like seeing it go, and she wants to talk. And she's like really like putting it in there. And eventually, I stop the table. Everybody quiets, and I look at her and I go, "Hey, so I want to acknowledge your bid. I see what you're doing. I know what this means. The issue is in this space. This doesn't mean anything. For us, this is not how we signal turn taking. If you would like to participate in this conversation, the way to do it is this." And I outlined like how to do it, how to ask for support if you needed the support, what the expectations were, what would happen when she did jump in. Um, and I was like, when you're ready, you know, and let the conversation erupted back at the table. So it's this loud, ruckus, laughter-filled table, and eventually you can just blurt it out. And the table hushes, beat red, and I was like, cool. Gave a direct response. There was a couple back and forth between, and that was it. And then the conversation merged back together and went back up in volume. And she's back. I was like, yeah, see, you're fine. Like this is how it works. Like you gotta be impassioned, and you gotta put your voice in there, and you gotta be passionate. And if you really want to be heard, you gotta prove that you want to be heard by being louder than everybody else, or getting a loud person to do it for you. Those are your options. And I think about this moment all the time because I could have just said, oh, she's doing this, so let me fix it for her. Or I could have said, she's doing this, she doesn't understand. And I'm not saying that it's every black person's responsibility to teach every outsider like our cultural norms. That's not how it works. But that is a lesson that comes up for people all the time. Like I tell that story and people utilize that lesson. And sometimes they don't believe me, and then they're in a group of majority black space and they're like, oh, no, actually, I do see these patterns that are there. I just didn't recognize them as a pattern. I didn't recognize them as rules. It's not lawless. There are rules. Um, and I think getting people to experience that and understand that can give them the tools they need to exist in our spaces in a way that is authentic to themselves and within the culture. We're not expecting you to suddenly become black. We see that you're white. We see that you're not from our culture. That's not what we're asking for. But we would like you to be a guest. So you're never going to be probably comfortable with all the things that we're comfortable with. But also, nobody was asking for that. So to me, I'm like, there you can read a bunch of books, and that'll get you somewhere. You could just be with black people, and that'll get you somewhere. But it is allowing yourself to be changed by a culture that is not like you, and remaining curious about yourself and these other people. That is what makes the difference of if you learn to do this or not. Because you may go into this, learn all these things, and realize, this isn't for me. And that's okay. But like to go into a thing and then change it to suit you better, that's not okay. And that doesn't mean you love that thing. That means you love your approximation of that thing. And it's different. So
Yeah,
those are some thoughts.
that's some great thoughts. That was a great like example to kind of show like the standards, difference in standards or difference in expectations. Um, can you speak more to matriarchy as it shows up as in a blues partner dance?
I like to. So, to be clear, there is some debate for people around is black culture a matriarchy or a patriarchy? Depending on who you talk to or who you read about, they will have different opinions. That's a thing. Uh, for me, my understanding and my experience with it is indeed, the power is indeed with the feminine people in the community, but there sometimes can be a, what would it be called? Like a cloak of patriarchy. Like it's men that are priests and preachers, but it's the hat women that are in charge. It's the church ladies that have the power. They have the actual power. So this man is in a position of power. And I think, personally, I have a whole theory about this, that this is because of white culture and being in white culture and having to create systems that allow us to cross culturally talk in some ways. Because if we demonstrated that our women were in power, that would not go over as well. Um, so we'd rather have some power than like through this system, but it comes with some of the baggage. But I say that women are generally in charge because whenever you look at a successful black man, there is a black woman or a black femme that is nearby and actually in charge. His eyes will glance to her, whoever she is. There's always somebody, you know. And so, in terms of partner dancing, I feel like the same rules apply. There's not this distinction between now we're dancing and now things are different. It's the same like wash of culture. So for instance, if I go to a black venue, I'm not looking for the man that is in charge. Even if I found him, he's not important. Like, even if I find him, even if he's the one on the ticket, even if he's the one paying all the bills, it's the one on the ticket, it's his project, all of those things can be true. Where's his wife? Where's his mother? That's who I want to know. His sister, his cousin. There's somebody who creates and maintains the cultural space, who like creates and maintains the hierarchy, who manages uh, power, and in some cases finances, um, and a bunch of other things. I find that in partner dance space, that means that there's a matriarchy, just like there is in most spaces. That's the most important person in the room. Be wary and respectful of that woman. Uh, Usually it's a woman, not always a woman. Sometimes it's a femme of some sort, particularly if you're in the queer spaces. It's not about, it's still matriarchy, but it's not necessarily about your personal gender. Um, but then that shows up in interpartner communication as well, because again, it's the same mapping of uh, gender roles. So you have traditional leads who are traditionally men, and you have follows that are traditionally women. We take our gender roles and we place those on those roles. If we're already in a different system where it's not assumed that patriarchy is the one defining power structure, that there's inherently two power structures that cover kind of different things, but ultimately one bows to the other, that shows up in our partner dancing as well. You have the leaders and you have the followers. You have the person who is setting up direction, rotation, the person that is making like decisions about oneself and suggestions about the partnership, or suggestions about the structure. The person who is like creating a framework for their partner to dance upon while also celebrating themselves. And then you have the other role, which is the one that's slightly more powerful but covers other things. You decide how you get there, when you get there, why you want to get there. And even if you are more of a pure follow, you are letting your partner lead you. They're getting the honor of leading you. Like it's that energy of I might be in what in white culture is seen as the lesser role, but ultimately ain't nothing gonna happen unless I let it happen. And like no and if say you were a woman or a follow who didn't have enough power, what would happen would be the same thing that happened with me and my friend at that table, which is one of the things I said is like if you can't do it, find one of your loudmouth friends to do it for you. I will be your loudmouth friend. That is also a part of the matriarchal structure. That doesn't, as in my experience, doesn't happen on the masculine side as much. So it is a like there is systems of this thing, and so the power structures are different, and maybe like 60-40 is like my experience of it. Now there are of course misogynists and misogynoirists who lean heavily into, well, the white man is giving me this power, so I have it. They don't tend to do well. They don't
Um,
tend to do well.
is that hotepery or no?
That's a little bit of hotepery.
A little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's hoteps are a subgroup of the misogynoir trope,
gotcha.
but definitely a version of it, which nobody respects. Like
Yeah.
that's the thing. The only one that respects them are also them. There's a whole episode in Dear White People about this. And I, as a black viewer, recognized way earlier than my white friends watching this that
Yeah.
that man was a hotep. And I was like,
Okay.
no, no. And then just to watch me and all of the black people on the show go, no, no, you were, no.
Oh God.
And my white community members were like, what's wrong with this? And I was like, you don't understand. This is a disaster.
Poor guy. Like, we had such high hopes for you, man.
We
Um,
did. We expected better. Like that's literally one of the phrases. We thought we expected better.
oh my God.
You were the chosen one.
Um, okay. So you are a trans man, and I believe you still prefer following. Can you
Yes.
speak to that?
Yeah. So basically, I like to be in charge. I like to be in charge. Um, I am very much of the opinion that your okay. So like, there's dance stuff of your gender has nothing to do with your dance role. Period. And then there's also, to me, black gender it has a different structure anyway, and so I had a conversation early in my transition. I went to a lesbian party that I was invited to, and I was like, I think I'm the wrong person for this, and they're like, you'll be fine. Um, so I went, and I originally went with white friends, and a small group of black butch women found me, and they adopted me immediately. They were like, "You're with us," and so I was kind of flip flopping between these two groups. It was very awkward, because neither of them knew each other and nobody knew why I was like going to the other group. And I'm like, okay. Um, but I realized really quickly that I didn't think they knew that I was trans. But it made sense. I hadn't started testosterone. It was very early, and eventually I go outside for air because I've just like I've had a little much too much of it. Is also like a loud club atmosphere, and one of the older women comes out and she goes, "So I don't remember the younger girl's name." She's like, "The younger girl says that we should ask you for your pronouns." And I was like, "Yeah, uh, my pronouns are he, him." And she goes, one, she's like, we didn't have that back in the day. And I'm like, we did, we actually did. That's a thing. And she's like, it's weird. Like, I don't get it. She's like, I don't get it. And so she's like, okay, but you're still with us. She's very warm, very supportive. Goes back inside. The younger girl comes out and goes, hey, what are your pronouns? We didn't ask. And I was like, oh, they're he, him. And she goes, there was something different about you. Like you look like us, but you don't feel like us. Like there's something different. And I can't identify what it is. And I was like, I don't know what it is, but that's how I knew I was trans and not a lesbian. Besides the fact that I mostly like men, but not here nor there. But there was this quality to it. But I was also raised like mostly with men, and my mom has a lot of male friends. She's in male-dominated fields, uh, but mostly with her and her mother, and they passed on matriarchy to me. So I have a lot of comfort in either space and role, and ultimately, I have large goals of what I want to do while dancing, and I want somebody to be there and support me in that. And I simply can't have that as a lead. Like, that's not, I lead with the cultural values I was discussing earlier. And so my role, just like my role as being a black man, is to have less power. Distinctly felt that when I transitioned. The drop in power in the community, and is to be foundational to my partner. I'm allowed to show up as myself, but I am not my own focus. Um, like my primary focus is on being a support is the way that I think about it, and then showing up as myself, and that can shift a bit. But like when you're thinking about moving another body through space and having clarity of movement and having clarity of rhythm, you're not thinking about the additional expression.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. It said clarity of movement, and it paused for a second,
Yeah,
like by connection.
clarity of movement and additional expression that one gets from following. Um, Again, that's not to say you can't have that as a lead. I have had dances where I do get that. I have had dances where I really love leading. It's just a different thing. It's just a different thing, and I prefer um, the technical skill of following and the power that I get through that um, to really shape a dance and to shape myself and play with the input that I get from my partner versus being the one that's inputting to my partner to do something with.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to the sensuality question. So I frame it as like sensuality as opposed to hypersexualization. Um, I know that sensuality and sexualization are different, or like being sexual are different.
Yeah.
So, um, how like can you speak to this coming from, culturally and personally, in the context of like blues dancing?
Yeah, I mean, when I came into the scene, people were there was more of a sexual edge to things that people were trying to figure out. And when I talked to people that were blues dancing before a certain point, that is one of the major components of it for people. Is to feel sexy, to drink, to slow dance, to do these things. And it's not that those aren't elements that are there, but what they mean can be different. Um, Versus, like, then we swung really far into it's not sexual, it's sensual. It's only sensual. Uh, it's close, but like, it's never sexual, never anything. And I understand why, and I think it was a correction that needed to happen. But for me personally, I think it also misses the point of these days. The way I talk about it is I'm like, okay, well, when you hug somebody, do you have the same hug you have with an elder or a grandparent that you do with a significant other? There you go.
You
That's
like,
the
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, I
That's
guess it would
it.
depend on the intention, right?
But generally, most people, there's a distinction there. And I don't need to get into the qualities of what makes it different. There's intent, there's the choices that you make, there's the way that you arrange bodies, the ways that you participate, what have you. That changes the context and the meaning of the same gesture of a hug. It's the same thing. Me dancing with my grandfather was not sexual nor sensual. It was neither of those. Neither of those. And yet, it was highly meaningful to me, and that can be true as well. I can have a dance with one person and it have a sensual edge to it, where it is more about like soft touch. I can have a dance where we're into more grinding things, and having hips and ass as a black person is not always considered to be an inherently sexual thing. It's just dancing. We're back to just dancing. Like, am I intentionally trying to do something, or am is this us moving our bodies together? You know, do we don't have the same values on the same things as purity culture to be like these things make it sexy and these things make it not sexy. So when people put that onto us, it's incorrect. Just like the breakdancing thing of people taking their lens and they go, huh, this is what it looks like to me. And I'm like, no, you don't need that. You need this one. And then you might see it very differently. Um, so I think hypersexuality is unfortunately a racist concept that comes to using the wrong lens. Sensuality, I feel like purely sensuality as a blues dance concept, is an overcorrection to take people who are choosing to keep this lens and go, okay, but look at it this way instead. And so it's a fix, but it's a fix. It's a band aid for an actual problem, which is we don't define sexuality that way. And being sexual, sensual, platonic, familial can all exist even if your bodies are close and touching. What matters is what is the point? What are you trying to go for? What are you trying to communicate to your partner? Is your partner receptive of that? Like, I'm a short person. Sometimes I'm at the height of certain body parts. And like, if they're more of a partner, maybe I'm turning more towards. If they're less of a partner, I'm going to turn more away. If they're more of a partner, maybe that's a different factor in our connection. If they're not, then that's not. There's different ways of handling these things. And I think that people uh, interpret black dance immediately as being sexy. It no matter really what it is. And the thing I will say for, particularly for swing dancers, is I'll usually go, do you think Balboa or tango, but particularly Balboa. Is Balboa sexy? And people go, well, no. And I'm like, what's the difference? Because we're using our hips? You got them. You should use them. Like, what, am I going to not use a part of my body because you, the outsider, are weird about it? Because you were told it was bad? Like, if we did that as a people, if we tried to fit ourselves into white cultural norms to be considered valuable, we would never be accepted because it's not possible. We are, like, even if you remove culture and you just look at us as people with brown skin and a different body type, we're brown skin with a different body. Like, our hair doesn't do the same thing, our skin doesn't do the same thing, need the same thing. Our weight distributes in different ways. We have different health outcomes. Like, all of these things matter. And that's why we're not just brown, degenerate forms of white Americans. We are our own thing in our own culture. Um, and so for me, I'm always like, okay, but I do have dances where they are sexy. And I do have dances where they're not sexy. And I do have dances where they're sensual. And I do have dances where they're playful. And I do have dances where there's all of these variations of this thing. And the whole range of life is supposed to be there. I feel like it's only particularly an issue when it mismatches with the community. So if the community is in a light, playful mood, and you're sitting over there doing some intentionally sexy grinding, maybe that's a choice you're making. I don't know. It's not. Maybe that's time for you to go somewhere else. But if we're in grown folks' hour, where we've sent the kids to bed, or at least made them attempt to go to bed, and we're playing grown folks' music and doing grown folk things, why not? As long as it's understood, like, just because you're hitting on somebody doesn't mean you get anything. Sometimes you go home alone, and that's okay. Uh, but I think a lot of the white community is either afraid of sexuality or doesn't know how to manage sexuality, and therefore they blame it on the dance and not on, like, their own lack of skill. Where I'm like, yes, there was a bunch of, like, sexual predation in the blues dance scene, but it was in part because none of y'all had the tools or knowledge to know how to manage that. There are a bunch of young college kids getting drunk together with no ideas of how to communicate. Half the community couldn't say no, and half the community, like, weren't used to listening for a no. Or if they were, they felt entitled for a bunch of different reasons that I'm not going to get into here. But those problems are not our problems. That's not a problem of the dance. That's a problem of the people and the culture that they brought to the dance. The dance didn't make that happen. Me doing funky butt did not make sexual assault in the community happen. I'm sorry. That's not how it works. Those are the people that were there. So, like, blues, I feel like it's a bad rap because it is close and because we use our hips. And there's respectability politics. That's super common in the black community. People, like, you go to church you go to the club on Saturday and go to church on Sunday. And that may happen, but you're not supposed to mention that you you saw each other at the club. It's like, but you did, and that's okay. Right.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, when you transition, did you
Mm.
feel like people perceived you differently? Because you were talking about body type, and like,
Yeah.
do you feel like in the dance scene, did you get sexualized and like, did you experience sexualization? Did you experience sexualization? If so, did it differ when between before and after transition?
Yes, it did. It did, and it does.
Uh,
So on one hand, particularly early on, I ran into a problem where people could perceive my gender correctly, but they assumed I led, which still happens all the time. Like it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was in Vienna, and people after auditions were like, "Why were you following? You could have been leading." And I looked at them and went, "Because I'm a follow." I don't, what is this? Uh, and on the other hand, people could remember I was a follow, but couldn't gender me correctly. Um, oh, just So that was really frustrating early on. The queer community even really struggles with this. I did find that in terms of sexualization, because my body changed, my sexual, like who was sexualizing and fetishizing me really drastically changed. So before it was usually white men, and now it is usually white women. And both are uncomfortable in different ways. They're very different dynamics. So with white men, it was often about placating and really mostly just ignoring some of the weird fetishy comments they would make. White women tend to feel more entitled to my body and to the things they assume I could offer them, whether that be leading, certain physical qualities, certain dynamics, and can be varying levels of pushy about it. So, although white men were originally interested uh, and would make kind of gross remarks, it felt very woman generic, you know? Um, Whereas the black male comments feel very gender specific, um, gender and race specific, because I the same women will not approach a white man at all to uh, insinuate anything, but will indeed approach me and give commentary and look upon me in certain ways and etc. etc. Uh, all of it makes me uncomfortable. So I'm a very big proponent of, you know, oppressed is oppressed. it doesn't really matter in this case, like if you're black woman oppressed or black man oppressed in these ways. Like one is dehumanizing, one is slightly dangerous. But one is harmful to your soul and one is potentially harmful to your body. Those are really the differences to me. But yeah, it was distinct, particularly when I started passing more consistently. And I often get feedback from women now that it's such a shame that you don't lead. Would you just lead just me? Please. Oh, don't you see how much fun they're having? Oh, I just love your skin. Please stop. Please stop. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, but to be fair, a white man once did ask me at a dance, it was like, so is it brown all the way down or? And I was like, wow, wow. What do you think happens? Like I just like shine like the moon underneath the black clothes. Like what is this? What is
Oh my God.
this? You clearly haven't made it happen, huh? You down with the swirl? I'm like, no. Yes, but no. Like, ew. What do you want? Like, who
Mhm.
says this?
Right. That's it's like there's objectification and then there's also just this like ugh, like
Oh,
it's
it's
just-
fetishization.
yeah, but
There's a reason why I chose fetishization and dehumanization, because that is the thing. There are people in the scene um, that collect mostly white femmes towards black men who collect them like Pokemon. And some people have done the work around that, and some people haven't. And some black men like it, and some people don't. Just like the same as on the other side. Less collecting, but you're special, you're different. Uh, some black women like that, some don't. I don't need no more chasers. I'm good. That's me. Everybody's got to. Everybody deals with it their own way, right? Um, but yeah, it is different, but it is still present.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so then this question is not so on the, sexual central, but tokenization. Have you experienced tokenization in the blue scene?
Yes. Uh, I mean, there's tons of stories, and then there's also like, so there's tokenization of people being like, oh, you're black, oh wow, like you, you know, aren't you a natural? Y'all just do it different, blah blah blah, like the common regular things. And then I've also been encountering, well, you're only successful because you're black. So either way, you know, people are choosing what aspects of me to highlight as various things. So in that case, it was that. Um, but yes, on multiple levels, because it's not even. I wouldn't even say it's just uh, being black, but some of my other identities as well. Um, People fight over, or I know I'm picked for representation. I know I'm picked for these things, and uh, I mostly try to focus on being valuable outside of the photos. But
Great way of putting it, right?
it is
Oh,
what it is.
yeah. Is there any last things you want to say about code switching for those? Because from what I understand, from what I've read about like black people have to code switch all the time. White people aren't so familiar with this because they're the dominant, so they're not used to having to
Right.
change like they're navigating being a minority in a space. Is there anything else you'd like to say to people participating in blues dancing and code switching into that, but being staying their authentic self?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has to kind of approach this question of what do you want to do about how authentic do you want to be to yourself versus how easily do you want to be understood? How easily do you want to be marketable versus how easily, again, do you want to be authentic? Do you want to sound like yourself? Um, and this is a question that all of us have to face within the community and outside of the community. Like, it's not actually that different of a question. And so, for an example, like, I have two accents. I have the standard one that I typically use that my mother insisted that I learn, that is common for my area where I grew up. And then I also have the one that is closer to what her mother sounds like. She was very insistent on us not using slang, of us not using AVE, because she wanted us to be able to easily get jobs and be marketable. There's also a lot of self complications, self identity complications. So the scene does ask for you to do that if you want an easier time. I think finding that balance is key. It's a band. It's a Swedish
Oh, it's a
band.
band.
It's a Swedish swing band. They're
That's
great.
hilarious.
Cats and dinosaurs. Um, Free advertisement for cats and dinosaurs.
Very